Patrick Marvin, Heather Noyes, and Nathan Strout for all of their help putting this beautiful event together, and their help with getting the paper that you have at your places. Being here in Portland is also very special to me. My husband, Dave, served as a volunteer firefighter in Westbrook on Ladder 1, and last night, we live in Arizona, in Scottsdale, Arizona. We arrived in Portland last night, and we had just a blast on Market and Exchange Streets. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'm also very pleased to be a Speakers Bureau member at the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. As Matt mentioned, it's the legacy foundation of Milton Friedman. And we'll recall back in 1955 that Friedman published a radical idea. Just because we fund public schools through government doesn't mean that politicians know what's best for other people's children. To improve American education for all students, Milton Friedman argued that we should let parents decide what schools are best for their children, free schools and teachers to innovate, and let funding follow students to the schools of their parents' choice. Now, this has caused a great deal of debate, as everyone in Maine knows very well. But the debate actually reminds me of one of my husband and my first dates when we were married. We had one of our first dates at the Ben Avery shooting range in Phoenix. Now, my husband is also a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy and a veteran of 2 wars, so I have a great teacher. But I also have a lifelong startle reflex, so you can imagine what taking me to a shooting range is like. And wouldn't you know it, just when we got there, on our right was a man shooting a .30-06, and on our left was another man with a Mauser, and then all the way down were men firing M4-like weapons. So it's rather than just run away crying, I didn't give up. I took a breath, took a few moments to acclimate, and I realized all the commotion around me wasn't a danger. Once I realized that, I was able to focus and hit the target. And that's a good analogy for all the arguments we hear against parental choice in education. Most of it's just a lot of noise. None of the arguments we hear, no matter how novel they may seem, to distract us from our target, which is the fact that parents know and love their children best, and they, no one else, must be in charge of their education, period. And that's where any honest education reform debate begins. Who knows best? And in my opinion, it is parents, or grandparents, or children's guardians. Now this morning I'm going to begin with a brief overview of education savings accounts, or ESAs, which are the latest innovation in parental choice, and why they're so important for Maine. Next, I'm going to review recent survey results showing that ESAs are now the most popular parental choice program option among Maine voters. Then I'll discuss what the evidence shows about parental choice and the advantages of ESAs. And I'll conclude with some design recommendations for a Maine ESA. But I realized yesterday on the plane, somewhere over Lake Michigan, that I made a big assumption in my remarks. The title of my remarks are The Future of School Choice in Maine. Now, in my line of work, you don't make assumptions, do you? We have to deal with some bad assumptions all the time. I stand by that title because I may be from over 3,000 miles away. But I can tell you there is, in my opinion, not only going to be a future for school choice in Maine, I think there's a really bright future. And we'll talk about why I think so. But I'd like to start off with just a quick anecdote. A lot of times when I have the opportunity to speak with people who are not from Arizona about parental choice, yeah, they generally like it. Oh, okay, not when I'm testifying. There are a lot of folks who don't like parental choice. But when events like this, people get excited about the ideas. And they say, Arizona, oh, that's great. You have 4 tuition tax credit scholarships. You have charter schools that are just some of the, not just the states, but the countries in the world, best public high schools out there, doing more with less. Now you have education savings accounts. We love those ideas. No way it's happening here. Maine is different. Well, why don't we flash forward to Arizona almost 10 years ago. Our governor was Janet Napolitano. I'm sure we all know who that is. And people really wrote Arizona off. And I will say, funders were not excited, supporters weren't excited. The partners who did not write off the Goldwater Institute where I was working at the time was the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, by the way. They were steadfast. Guess what happened when you get good people together, parents, researchers, folks. We also worked with the Institute for Justice. Under Janet Napolitano's, during her term, we introduced and expanded more parental choice in Arizona than at any time in our state's history. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere, and there are very good reasons to believe that you have some great conditions going on in Maine that I think ESAs, the time is really right. Strike while the iron's hot. So let's start with a brief overview of ESAs in a Maine context. The concept behind ESAs is simple. Parents who do not prefer a public education for their child simply inform the state, promise not to re-enroll their child while they are participating in the ESA program, and 90% of what the state, and when I say state, that's also a combination of state and local funding, 90% of what the state would have sent to the district public school to educate that child is instead deposited into a designated education savings account for that child. Parents get a restricted or dedicated use debit card, and the funds are distributed quarterly. So let's say Maine right now, on average about $10,000 a student. I'm being conservative, I'm not including, the debt service, the construction, the transportation, all that. $10,000. $9,000 would be deposited into a child's ESA. That's dispersed quarterly. So we're getting ready for back to school. Parents go out, decide, okay, do I want a private school? Actually, I prefer to homeschool, so I'll purchase the homeschooling curricula. I actually like some of the new online schools, so I'd like to do that. Or what most Arizona parents do, they combine it. Send my child to this school, but I also get the tutoring and the therapies and pay the testing fees. Before the next quarterly disbursement, parents have to send in expense accounts down to the penny with receipts. If parents misspend, they have to pay the money back. Guess what happens if they don't pay the money back? The Attorney General gets a call. Imagine that kind of transparency and accountability with traditional public school finance today. Parents, right now, ESAs are operating in Arizona and Florida. Almost 3,000 children are currently participating in these programs. Arizona became the first state in 2011 to enact an ESA program that was limited to children with special needs. Every year since then, we've expanded it to include children who are in or assigned, would otherwise attend failing public schools, children of military parents, active duty military parents, children enter from the foster care system, also siblings and kindergartners. Florida also enacted an ESA program in 2014 for special needs children. Just this past year alone, it expanded eligibility for more children and it tripled funding. And as of this June, 3 more states have enacted ESAs: Mississippi, Tennessee, and Nevada. Nevada's program, in my opinion, is now the strongest in the country. Why? Virtually every child in the state is eligible. It's not this pick and choose constituency. Also, unlike most programs which deposit 90% of state funding, for low-income children and children with special needs in Nevada, 100% of what the state would have spent to educate that child in a district school goes into that child's ESA. That's the way to go. Go universal, go 100% with the funding. So how would ESAs work in Maine? Again, $10,000. It's very simple, and one of the best things about this program is its simplicity. But what we're going to hear, and let's just get it right out on the table. Even at 90%, the argument you're going to hear is, well, you're starving public schools, you're hurting teachers, the sky's going to fall, it's going to be a calamity. Let's work through some of that finance. The public school does not have that child. A child who uses the ESA goes elsewhere. Doesn't matter where. Goes elsewhere. The school still keeps that $1,000 from state and local funding. Here's what else they keep. Over $1,000. I looked at Maine, and the per pupil amount for federal funding is around, for easy math, it's over $1,000. So imagine this, if you were to enact an ESA for the upcoming school year. Right up the street in South Portland, the district would have over $2,000 for a child they are not educating. And they would have a year to adjust. Because don't we always hear that, oh, budgeting is hard, how are we going to adjust if children leave? You have a year. So that's how that would work. So please don't fall for the, oh, this is going to starve schools. Keep that in mind, at least $2,000 a year for every child a district school is not educating. Now, why does Maine need ESAs? Maine may be home to the country's second oldest voucher program. 1873 you've had it. Vermont beat you by a couple of years. The town tuitioning program. But it's highly restricted to students based on not having public schools in their towns serving their grades. And it bans private religious schools from participating. I started looking into this. How ironic that it's my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the person responsible back in the 80s and 90s for restricting Maine's town tuitioning program was actually the beneficiary of a private religious education. So, irony for you, sad irony. Maine now has 6 public charter schools, but they all reported waiting lists last school year. Overall, and I'm getting this information from the school work group that the governor put in place, his proposal a couple years ago. Overall, just 15% of Maine school children exercise some form of school choice. I checked my glasses. I thought I read that wrong. Even according to the U.S. Department of Education, the national average is over 37%. Why is this? And the reason is simple. Most students in the state of Maine attend public schools based on where their parents can afford to live. Now, opponents of parental choice in education could, and they certainly do insist, that Maine students and parents have enough options. So you have enough options. The public schools are delivering, they can meet everybody's needs. We just need more money. That's the recommendation from some school choice work group members. But the poll results tell a very different story. A recent poll of likely voters conducted by the Maine Heritage Policy Center and the Freedman Foundation for Educational Choice found that 90% of children in Maine attend public schools. But you know that only around 1/3 of them respond that they think that their public school is the best option for their child. More than half of them, 52%, say that a private school or homeschool setting would be the best option for their child. And ESAs are also the preferred school choice model among likely Maine voters. 57% think ESAs would be the best way to go. In addition, more than 2/3 of Maine voters believe that parental choice programs should be available to all students, not just certain categories of students. So with that we already have parental demand. Maine voters want it. And by the way, other polling, national polling has shown that among key voting demographics, particularly 18 to 34, respond that they are 40% more likely to vote for political candidates that support education savings accounts. As election time draws near, keep that in mind. You may want to share that information with your elected officials. But so many times we hear that parental choice doesn't work. I just want to pull my hair out with this one. Parental choice is actually the most widely studied area of education research out there. To give you some perspective, one gold standard random assignment study on the effects of small class sizes was done, and that one study launched thousands of class size reduction programs across the country. Do you know how many gold standard random assignment studies there are proving definitively that parental choice works? 12. And we're still fighting. So parental choice works. And what did those studies show? Especially disadvantaged children have higher math and reading scores, have higher high school graduation rates, have higher college attendance rates, and have higher college completion rates than their peers who do not have parental choice programs. Another large body of research also shows that, as I'm sure most people, if not all of us in this room know, competition works. There have been literally hundreds of analyses in the past 30 decades alone, all showing that school choice and the competition from it improves public school performance, efficiency, and students. One of my favorites is research that looked at all of the studies out there from Columbia University Teachers College. Not exactly fans of putting parents in charge of their children's education. They found that competition benefited public schools, quote, across all outcomes, including better scores, better teacher salaries, better efficiency, and smaller class sizes. Now, parents in Arizona are also reporting that their children are flourishing with their ESA programs. Parents in Florida are reporting the same. Children with special needs, young children who are not performing at grade level, are now at and beyond grade level, and they're happier, they're doing better, they're learning more socially and academically. Parents of older children in high school at risk of dropping out, they weren't going to make it. Not only did they change their grades from C's to straight A's, they are graduating and they have multiple college offers. They're acing their ACTs and their SATs. This is fantastic news. And as one parent who participated in the program put it, ESAs are a real game changer. That's because ESAs have several advantages over the status quo. Having the freedom to choose not just where, but how children are educated has resulted in an unprecedented 100% participation approval rating. 100% of Arizona parents are happy with their children's ESAs. Here's some other advantages. ESAs are easy to use. Because ESAs are a student-centered program, maintaining them is about as challenging as balancing the family checkbook. Participating parents submit their quarterly reports, and quarterly deposits are made into their child's account. There it is. ESAs are also fiscally responsible, and that's a really important concern anywhere in the country. Let's face it, in any state, about 35% of your general fund budget is going to go just to K-12 education. And look how high the taxes are going. As Friedman noted decades ago, we make better choices when we're spending our own hard-earned money. Thus, the more we avoid those third-party payer schemes, the more sensitive we are to costs, prices, and most important, value. ESAs go a long way toward that goal by putting parents directly in charge of their children's education funding and accounting for every expenditure down to the last penny before any other funds are dispersed. In addition to the structural program accountability, I love the fact that ESAs incentivize responsible stewardship and fiscal discipline. Here's why. With ESAs, parents are allowed to keep any funds that are unused at the end of the school year. Those funds roll over. So parents can use them for future expenses, education expenses, not just in the next year or two, but eventually college tuition, if parents want. So this really incentivizes parents to go look for the best quality programs at the best prices. And what I like about that is, unlike most government accounting schemes, the end of the fiscal year, those use it or lose it spending sprees. I have to tell you, neighbors, folks who live next to my mom, got a smoking deal on 2 big air conditioning units that would probably cost close to $20,000. You want to know why? Because it was the end of the school year. The school had just put these units on a few months ago. These are huge, expensive things. But the federal government was offering new money for the green program, the schools, the Go Green program. It's not like the environment too, but it shouldn't be that expensive. What the school district did was it pulled out these fairly used air conditioning units and spent tons more putting in green units. So needless to say, my mom's neighbor just made off like a bandit. She said, I feel like I should invite other people over for lunch or something because, the taxpayers just got soaked on this deal, but I made out like a bandit. So anyway, you don't have those sorts of use it or lose it schemes. Now, programs in Arizona, Florida, and Nevada really maximize the value proposition because they expressly allow parents to keep unused funds for college. Now, ESAs are also constitutional. How many times do we hear that all of these programs, regardless of how effective or popular parental choice is, opponents have tried to litigate them to death for more than 2 decades, insisting that that any school choice program, parental choice program, violates bedrock constitutional principles. The ink was barely dry on enabling legislation in both Arizona and Florida for education savings accounts when opponents filed lawsuits to kill them. These opponents were filed by teachers' unions, members of school boards unions, public employee union members, and others. Now, courts in those states have all ruled that ESAs pass constitutional muster for several reasons. I'm going to go over those because they're important, because we're going to hear, oh, they're not constitutional. We heard this, recently with New Hampshire, when New Hampshire enacted its tuition tax credit scholarship program. Let me tell you, what you folks are being told is downright lies about what the Supreme Court has ruled. ESAs are no different. First, ESAs are neutral with regard to religion because they make a variety of education options available, and it's parents, not government, are doing the choosing. Second, ESAs do not run afoul of constitutional religious aid bans or Blaine amendments because funds are for the benefit of students, not any particular type of school. Third, state courts have made clear that ESA students do not forfeit their rights to a free public education because at any time, if their parents decide we don't want to participate in the ESA program, they re-enroll back in their chosen public school. And finally, the courts have rejected out of hand the notion that parental choice through ESAs harms public schools, students, and teachers by draining money. As we discussed earlier, you're actually going to have at least $2,000 left over. In fact, if we were to buy that argument, it occurred to me, oh, you can't let children go someplace else because you're going to drain money from the public schools. Well, then I hope your governor and your legislature passes a law that no child is ever allowed to move out of his or her town, much less the state of Maine, because that's going to hurt the public schools. Of course, that sort of thinking doesn't make any sense. In my opinion, the time is now for ESAs in Maine. ESAs are popular. They're easy to use. They're fiscally responsible, and they're constitutional. Best of all, they empower parents to choose how, not just where, their children are educated, which customizes learning for children to levels no one-size-fits-all system could ever match, no matter how lavishly you funded that system. In fact, if I had my way, all education funding would go through education savings accounts. It's a lot like voting. If you don't have a pulse, you shouldn't be allowed to vote. If you don't have a pulse, you shouldn't get education funding rather than direct funding through these bureaucracies. And one of the questions I'm always asked is, where does all the money go? Well, that's a pretty complicated answer, but it doesn't go where it should, into the classrooms. There is no good reason for example, why teachers in Maine or anywhere else in the United States should not be able to get paid an engineer salary, and if they're really good, even a rock star salary. Think of how many children are in a typical Maine classroom. Let's just say 20. At $10,000 per student, why are teachers making six-figure salaries? Because you've got to fund administration, and there are a lot of other things the money goes to. The money is not going to the classroom. What's interesting about ESAs is, and as they're right now largely serving disadvantaged student populations, do you know how much money Arizona parents have left over? Left over. These are disadvantaged children. These are the children we're told are too expensive and too hard to educate. We have to increase funding. Arizona parents had combined over $670,000 left over at the end of year one, when about 130 parents were participating. The fact that there is money left over, how many times do you hear that education is underfunded, education is underfunded? I'm going to tell you, some people are not going to like ESAs because it sheds light on the lie that it is indeed possible to educate children to levels we never thought possible for less. The key is putting the right people in charge, and that's parents. You don't have to be finance experts. You don't have to be a certified teacher. You don't need all of these false credentials to manage your child's ESA. And that's why I like all education funding, because that would be great. Just here's your funding, pick your education provider. Don't care. But there are some program designs that I think we should keep in mind. First, like Nevada, make your ESA universal. Oh, I skipped something. This is one reason why I think Maine especially is good for ESAs. You've just taken the path on meaningful school finance reform. It's now cost-driven, not expense-driven. I have to tell you, getting public school finance reform, even off the ground, states won't touch it. That is too scary. So imagine if you had all of your, essential programs and services funding, your general purpose aid, all of that, just go through the ESAs. And imagine having that all transparent, and I'd put it online so everybody can see where the money's going. There wouldn't be a question. But if you were to do a program, first, follow Nevada's example. Make it universal. All children have special needs. All children are unique. All parents should have the ability to customize and personalize education for their children. Parents know their children best. Just as a matter of principle, it should be universal. Second, fully fund ESAs. Nevada, again, is the only state to do this at 100% for low-income and special needs children. We all understand the politics of why you call it 90%. It makes it harder. It doesn't make it impossible. It makes it harder for opponents to say, oh, you're starving public schools. But look at it this way. At 100%, even at 90%, Arizona parents had hundreds of thousands of dollars left over. Is this money for a schooling system? Do we pay taxes for a schooling system? Or so children are educated? Fully fund ESAs, let parents roll over those funds, and ultimately manage it. I would also not put lids, or I would blow the lids off program caps. Do not limit the number of children who can participate. Do not limit the providers. Let all sorts of providers compete, because as we know, government shouldn't be in the business of picking and choosing our service providers. Let all providers compete. Online schools, different ways of delivering education. And if parents aren't happy, guess what? They take their ESA funds and go elsewhere. That's the best way to have program accountability. Let all of these folks compete. Because it would be like, we don't want to set up a situation where, do you really want to go to the BMV to get a referral for a mechanic? No, then we shouldn't be doing that in education. And finally, private administration is best. Just because, now, government ensuring taxpayer dollars are used as intended is a core government responsibility. However, government oversight does not require government administration. Florida has a good model for how they administer their ESAs. They have a tuition, they let nonprofit scholarship granting organizations administer the education savings accounts and work with parents. Arizona, even though our Department of Education is very friendly, our administration is very friendly to parental choice, has been